Welcome to the Sleep Scholar. Tonight, we'll explore a quiet corner of history together. Settle in, close your eyes, and let these gentle facts carry you into deep sleep. In the year 1200, the Anatolian Peninsula presented a complex tapestry of competing powers, fragmented territories, and shifting allegiances that would, over the course of the following century, provide the essential backdrop for the emergence of what historians would later recognize as one of history's most enduring empires. To understand the eventual rise of Ottoman power, one must first examine this intricate political landscape where Byzantine weakness, Seljuk decline, and the aftermath of the First Crusade had created numerous opportunities for ambitious leaders and emerging Turkish beyliks to establish themselves across the fertile lands of western and central Anatolia. The Byzantine Empire, which had dominated this region for centuries, found itself in a severely weakened state following the catastrophic defeat at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071. This decisive encounter between the forces of Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes and the Seljuk Sultan Alp Arslan had fundamentally altered the balance of power in Anatolia, opening vast territories to Turkish settlement and gradually eroding Byzantine control over lands that had been the empire's Anatolian heartland. By the dawn of the 13th century, Byzantine authority had retreated primarily to the coastal regions and a handful of fortified cities, leaving much of the interior to various Turkish groups and local strongmen who operated with varying degrees of independence. The Great Seljuk Empire, which had initially benefited from the Byzantine collapse, was itself experiencing significant fragmentation by this period. The death of Sultan Malik Shah I in 1092 had triggered a succession crisis that effectively ended centralized Seljuk control over their vast territories. The Sultanate of Rum, established in Anatolia with its capital at Konya, represented the most significant remnant of Seljuk power in the region. Yet even this successor state struggled to maintain effective control over the increasingly independent Turkish tribal groups and emerging beyliks that dotted the Anatolian landscape. Records from this period indicate that the authority of the Rum Seljuks was often more theoretical than practical, particularly in the border regions where local commanders exercised considerable autonomy. The fragmentation of political authority created what historians describe as a fluid frontier environment, where territorial boundaries shifted frequently and allegiances could change based on military success, marriage alliances, or simple opportunism. This instability was further complicated by the establishment of the Latin Empire of Constantinople following the Fourth Crusade in 1204, which had definitively ended the unity of the Byzantine Empire and created additional power vacuums throughout the former imperial territories. The emergence of the Empire of Nicaea as a Byzantine successor state added yet another layer of complexity to the regional political situation, as its rulers sought to reclaim traditional Byzantine lands while competing with various Turkish groups for control of strategic locations. Archaeological evidence and contemporary chronicles suggest that the economic disruption caused by this political fragmentation was substantial. Yet it also created opportunities for enterprising groups who could provide stability and protection to local populations. Trade routes that had previously operated under imperial protection now required the security services of local strongmen, creating revenue streams that could support small military forces and gradually expand territorial control. The Via Regia, which connected Constantinople to the eastern provinces, passed through numerous independent territories by the early 1200s, with each local ruler extracting tolls and tribute from passing merchants. Among the most significant of these emerging Turkish groups were the various beyliks that had established themselves throughout western and central Anatolia. The Danishmend dynasty, based in the region around Sivas and Kayseri, had emerged as one of the most powerful Turkish states in the late 11th century, often competing directly with the Rum Seljuks for supremacy in central Anatolia. Contemporary sources indicate that the Danishmends controlled significant portions of the Black Sea coast and maintained a sophisticated administrative system that incorporated both Turkish and Byzantine elements. Their power reached its zenith under Emir Gazi ibn Danishmend and his successor Gumushtegin Gazi, who successfully captured several important Byzantine fortresses and expanded Danishmend territory considerably. The Seljuk dynasty, operating from their base in Erzurum, represented another significant Turkish power in eastern Anatolia during this period. Founded by Abul Qasim Seljuk in the 1070s, this beylik had established control over crucial trade routes connecting Anatolia to Georgia and Armenia. Historical records suggest that the Seljuks maintained diplomatic relations with both the Rum Seljuks and various Georgian kingdoms, demonstrating the complex web of alliances that characterized Anatolian politics during this era. The dynasty's ability to survive and prosper for over 2 centuries indicates their skill in navigating the challenging political environment of medieval Anatolia. Similarly, the Artukid dynasty had carved out territories in southeastern Anatolia and northern Mesopotamia, establishing their capitals at Hasankeyf and Mardin. The Artukids, who traced their origins to a Turkish commander named Artuk, who had served under the Great Seljuks, demonstrated remarkable administrative capabilities and became known for their architectural patronage and cultural achievements. Their coins and inscriptions from this period provide valuable insights into the political and economic conditions of early 13th century Anatolia, revealing a society in transition between nomadic Turkish traditions and settled Islamic governance. The Mengücek dynasty, based in Erzincan and Divri, controlled important mining regions and trade routes in eastern Anatolia. Their territory encompassed valuable iron mines and agricultural lands, providing the economic foundation for a stable, if relatively small, political entity. Archaeological excavations at Divri have revealed sophisticated architectural projects from this period, including the famous Divri Great Mosque and Hospital, which demonstrates the cultural sophistication achieved by these regional dynasties despite the overall political fragmentation of the era. In western Anatolia, closer to the shifting Byzantine frontier, numerous smaller beyliks emerged during the late 12th and early 13th centuries. These groups, often centered around a single charismatic leader and his extended family, represented a more fluid and opportunistic form of political organization. They typically controlled limited territories perhaps encompassing a fortified town and its surrounding agricultural lands, and their survival depended largely on their ability to adapt to changing circumstances and form temporary alliances with larger powers when necessary. The economic foundations of these fragmented political entities varied considerably, but most relied on a combination of pastoralism, agriculture, and control of trade routes. The Turkish groups that had settled in Anatolia during the 11th and 12th centuries brought with them traditional nomadic practices, including seasonal migration patterns and livestock management techniques well suited to the Anatolian plateau. However, the need to maintain control over settled populations and agricultural resources gradually encouraged many of these groups to adopt more sedentary lifestyles and develop administrative systems capable of managing diverse populations. Contemporary sources describe a complex relationship between the Turkish ruling elites and the predominantly Greek and Armenian populations who had inhabited Anatolia for centuries. While military conquest had established Turkish political control, the practical necessities of governance required accommodation and cooperation with existing local structures. Many Byzantine administrative practices were retained, and local Christian populations often continued to play important roles in commerce and crafts. This synthesis of Turkish military leadership with Byzantine administrative traditions would prove to be a crucial element in the eventual success of the Ottoman state, though such developments lay far in the future during this period of initial fragmentation. Religious considerations also played a significant role in shaping the political landscape of 13th century Anatolia. The Turkish rulers, while predominantly Muslim, governed populations that included Orthodox Christians, Armenians, and various smaller religious communities. The practical need to maintain stability and collect taxes from these diverse groups encouraged a relatively tolerant approach to religious differences, though conversion to Islam was often advantageous for ambitious individuals seeking advancement within Turkish-controlled territories. Sufi orders and Islamic scholars gradually established themselves throughout the region, creating networks of religious influence that transcended political boundaries and would later provide important sources of legitimacy for emerging Turkish rulers. The role of the traditional Islamic institution of Ghazi, or warrior for the faith, became particularly important in the frontier regions where Turkish and Byzantine territories intersected. These areas, characterized by frequent military activity and shifting boundaries, attracted adventurous individuals seeking both spiritual merit and material gain through participation in what was conceptualized as holy war. The Ghazi tradition provided ideological justification for territorial expansion, while also creating informal networks of cooperation among various Turkish groups operating in similar circumstances. Military technology and tactics during this period reflected the diverse influences present in Anatolian society. Turkish forces typically emphasized mobility and archery, drawing on nomadic traditions that had proven effective in the initial conquest of Anatolian territories. However, the requirements of siege warfare and the defense of fixed positions gradually led to the adoption of Byzantine and Islamic military techniques, including the use of Greek fire, sophisticated siege engines, and heavily armored cavalry. The integration of these diverse military traditions would eventually contribute to the tactical flexibility that characterized later Ottoman military success. The social structures that emerged within these fragmented political entities typically combined Turkish tribal hierarchies with elements derived from Byzantine and Islamic models. Extended kinship groups remained important sources of military manpower and political support, while the gradual adoption of Islamic administrative practices provided frameworks for governing diverse populations. Marriage alliances between ruling families created complex webs of obligation and cooperation that sometimes transcended immediate territorial boundaries, though such relationships could also generate conflicts when dynastic interests diverged. By the middle of the 13th century, this fragmented political landscape was beginning to show signs of consolidation as more successful beyliks absorbed their weaker neighbors and established more stable territorial boundaries. The Rum Seljuks, despite their internal difficulties, managed to reassert some degree of central authority under Sultan Alaeddin Keykubat I, who ruled from 1220 to 1237. His reign marked a brief renaissance of Seljuk power, characterized by ambitious building projects, expanded trade relationships, and successful military campaigns that temporarily restored Rum Seljuk prestige throughout Anatolia. However, this Seljuk revival would prove to be temporary, as the approaching Mongol invasions would soon disrupt the entire regional balance of power and create new opportunities for ambitious Turkish leaders to establish independent political entities. The Battle of Kose Dağ in 1243, where Mongol forces decisively defeated a Rum Seljuk army, effectively ended meaningful Seljuk independence and reduced the Sultanate to a Mongol protectorate. This development would prove crucial for the future Ottoman rise, as it eliminated the most significant centralized authority in Anatolia and created additional space for the emergence of new Turkish beyliks along the Byzantine frontier. Among these newly emergent Turkish beyliks that arose in the wake of Seljuk decline, one particular tribal confederation would ultimately eclipse all others, though this outcome was far from inevitable in the late 13th century. The beylik that would eventually become the Ottoman Empire emerged in the northwestern region of Anatolia, in the fertile valleys and rolling hills near the Byzantine frontier town of Soğut. This territory, located approximately 70 miles southeast of the important Byzantine city of Nicaea, represented prime real estate for ambitious Turkish leaders seeking to establish themselves along the constantly shifting borderlands between Islamic and Christian domains. The man traditionally credited with founding this dynasty bears the name Osman, from which the term Ottoman derives through various linguistic transformations. Historians generally accept that Osman lived from approximately 1258 to 1324, though these dates remain subject to scholarly debate due to the relative scarcity of contemporary documentation. What we know of Osman's life and achievements comes largely from later Ottoman chroniclers, who naturally sought to glorify their dynasty's origins, often embellishing historical facts with legendary elements that served political and cultural purposes. According to the most widely accepted historical accounts, Osman was the son of Ertuğrul Gazi, who led a Turkish tribal group of perhaps 200 to 400 families into Anatolia during the mid-13th century. These tribal confederations, known as oymaks, represented the basic political and social units of nomadic Turkish society. Ertuğrul's group apparently received permission from the Rum Seljuk Sultan Alaaddin Keykubat I to settle in the Soyut region, where they would serve as frontier guards against Byzantine incursions. This arrangement, known as the İkta system, granted land use rights in exchange for military service, a common practice throughout the medieval Islamic world. The historical record suggests that Ertuğrul's death occurred sometime around 1280, at which point leadership of the tribal confederation passed to his son Osman. However, the transition was likely not automatic, as Turkish tribal customs typically involved consultation among leading family members and tribal elders before confirming a new leader. Osman would have needed to demonstrate his worthiness through a combination of military prowess, political acumen, and ability to maintain the loyalty of his followers. The early years of Osman's leadership coincided with a period of significant political instability throughout Anatolia. The Ilkhanate, the Mongol state that had dominated the region since the 1240s, was experiencing internal succession disputes that weakened its ability to maintain effective control over its Anatolian territories. Simultaneously, the Byzantine Empire, though it had recaptured Constantinople from the Crusaders in 1261, remained severely weakened and could not adequately defend its Anatolian possessions. These circumstances created what historians often describe as a power vacuum, allowing enterprising local leaders like Osman to expand their influence gradually. Contemporary sources, though limited, suggest that Osman's early military activities focused primarily on raiding Byzantine settlements and gradually capturing small fortified positions. These operations serve multiple purposes beyond simple territorial expansion. Successful raids provided valuable booty that could be distributed among followers, thereby maintaining their loyalty and attracting additional warriors to join the confederation. Furthermore, each successful military action enhanced Osman's reputation as an effective leader, which was crucial for establishing legitimacy in a political environment where authority derived largely from demonstrated competence rather than inherited rights. The methodical nature of Osman's expansion appears to have been one of his most significant strategic innovations. Rather than attempting dramatic conquests that might have provoked massive retaliation from more powerful neighbors, historical evidence suggests that he pursued a policy of gradual territorial consolidation. This approach allowed his forces to digest each conquest properly, converting new territories into secure bases for further expansion, while minimizing the risk of overextension that had destroyed many other ambitious frontier leaders. Among the most important early conquests attributed to Osman was the capture of the fortress town of Karacahisar, which probably occurred sometime between 1288 and 1291. This victory was particularly significant because it provided Osman's forces with a substantial fortified position that could serve as a base for further operations against Byzantine territory. Archaeological evidence from the site suggests that the town was indeed occupied during this period, lending credence to the Ottoman historical accounts of its capture. The siege of Karacahisar, as described in a later Ottoman chronicles, exemplifies the methodical approach that would characterize early Ottoman military strategy. Rather than attempting a direct assault against the fortified walls, Osman's forces apparently established a blockade around the town and waited for hunger and disease to weaken the defenders' resolve. This patient approach to siege warfare required considerable organizational capability, as besieging forces needed to maintain themselves in the field for extended periods, while preventing the defenders from receiving supplies or reinforcements. Following the successful capture of Karacahisar, historical records indicate that Osman continued his gradual expansion into the Sakarya River Valley, where several small Byzantine settlements offered attractive targets for conquest. The town of Yenishehir fell to Ottoman forces sometime around 1299, providing another important administrative center from which to govern the expanding territories. The date of 1299 has particular significance in Ottoman historical tradition, as later chroniclers would identify this year as marking the formal establishment of the Ottoman Beylik as an independent political entity. However, modern historians exercise considerable caution regarding the precision of these dates, noting that the concept of formal independence may not have been particularly meaningful in the fluid political environment of late 13th century Anatolia. Rather than declaring independence in any modern sense, Osman likely simply ceased acknowledging the theoretical authority of the declining Seljuk Sultanate, while avoiding any actions that might provoke intervention by more powerful neighbors such as the Ilkhanate or the Byzantine Empire. The gradual nature of this transition toward independence reflects the pragmatic political instincts that would characterize Ottoman statecraft throughout the dynasty's long history. By avoiding dramatic gestures or provocative declarations, Osman minimized the risk of creating coalitions among his enemies while maximizing his freedom of action in pursuing territorial expansion and political consolidation. This careful balance between ambition and prudence would prove to be one of the most enduring characteristics of Ottoman political culture. As Osman's territorial holdings expanded, the challenge of effective governance became increasingly complex. The transformation from tribal leader to territorial ruler required the development of new administrative structures and practices that could manage sedentary populations alongside the traditional nomadic followers who formed the core of his military strength. Historical evidence suggests that Osman began appointing deputies to govern captured towns while he continued to lead military campaigns, establishing a pattern of delegated authority that would later evolve into the sophisticated Ottoman administrative system. The religious dimension of Osman's political project deserves particular attention, as it would become central to later Ottoman imperial ideology. Contemporary sources suggest that Osman and his followers identify themselves as Ghazis, or holy warriors, engaged in the expansion of Islamic territory at the expense of Christian Byzantine domains. This religious framework provided both ideological justification for territorial expansion and a powerful tool for recruitment, as it attracted warriors from throughout the Islamic world who sought to participate in religiously sanctioned military activities. The Ghazi tradition had deep roots in Islamic history and culture, tracing back to the earliest periods of Islamic expansion in the 7th and 8th centuries. For Turkish tribal leaders operating along the Byzantine frontier, adopting this religious identity served multiple practical purposes. It connected their local political ambitions to broader Islamic historical narratives, thereby lending greater legitimacy to their activities among Muslim populations. Additionally, the Ghazi identity attracted financial support and military recruits from established Islamic territories, where rulers and wealthy individuals often provided funding for frontier warfare against non-Muslim enemies. However, modern historians emphasize that the religious aspects of early Ottoman expansion should not be understood in purely ideological terms. The practical realities of frontier warfare required considerable pragmatism in dealing with Christian populations and Byzantine political authorities. Evidence suggests that Osman and his successors often made temporary alliances with Byzantine nobles when such arrangements served their strategic interests, demonstrating that religious considerations, while important, did not override practical political calculations. The later Ottoman historical tradition would elaborate extensively on Osman's career, creating a rich body of foundation myths and legendary narratives designed to glorify the dynasty's origins. Among the most famous of these stories is Osman's dream, in which he supposedly received divine confirmation of his destiny to establish a great Islamic empire. According to this legend, Osman dreamed that a great tree grew from his body, spreading its branches across 3 continents and providing shade for countless people, while rivers flowed from beneath its roots and mountains rose around its base. This dream narrative, while historically dubious, reveals important aspects of later Ottoman imperial ideology and self-perception. The imagery of the tree spanning continents reflected the dynasty's eventual territorial expansion across Europe, Asia, and Africa, while the references to providing shade for diverse populations suggested the Ottoman commitment to governing multi-ethnic and multi-religious subjects. The dream story also emphasized divine sanction for Ottoman rule, a crucial element in establishing legitimacy within Islamic political culture. Another significant element in the legendary accounts of Osman's career involves his relationship with various Islamic holy men and scholars who supposedly recognized his future greatness and provided spiritual guidance for his political activities. These stories, while lacking reliable historical documentation, illustrate the importance of religious authority in legitimizing political power within medieval Islamic society. By claiming the support of respected religious figures, later Ottoman chroniclers sought to demonstrate that their dynasty's rise represented the fulfillment of divine will rather than mere worldly ambition. The historical Osman died in 1324, having spent nearly half a century transforming a small tribal confederation into a significant regional power that controlled substantial territories in northwestern Anatolia. His death marked the end of the founding phase of Ottoman political development and the beginning of a new era under his son and successor, Orhan, who would face the challenge of consolidating and expanding upon his father's achievements while adapting Ottoman institutions to the changing political environment of the 14th century. The succession of Orhan to the Ottoman leadership around 1326 represented a critical juncture in the empire's development, as the new ruler inherited not merely territorial holdings, but also the complex task of transforming his father's military conquests into a sustainable administrative framework. Orhan Gazi, whose name would become synonymous with systematic expansion and institutional innovation, approached governance with a methodical precision that distinguished his reign from the more improvisational conquests of the founding period. Historical chronicles from this era suggest that Orhan possessed a temperament particularly suited to the consolidation of power, demonstrating patience in siege warfare and diplomatic negotiations that would prove essential to Ottoman success in the densely populated regions of northwestern Anatolia. The early years of Orhan's reign were characterized by careful assessment of the geopolitical landscape surrounding Ottoman territories, as Byzantine control over key urban centers remained formidable despite the empire's broader weakness. Records indicate that Orhan spent considerable time during 1326 and 1327 organizing the administrative structures necessary to govern the diverse populations that had come under Ottoman control, including Greek Christians, Turkish nomads, and various Anatolian communities whose allegiances remained fluid. The establishment of a more formal governmental apparatus during this period represented a significant departure from the tribal confederation model that had characterized earlier Ottoman organization, as Orhan began implementing administrative practices borrowed from both Byzantine and Islamic precedents. The siege of Bursa, which commenced in approximately 1317 under Osman's direction, but continued well into Orhan's reign, exemplifies the methodical approach that would define Ottoman expansion during this period. Unlike the rapid cavalry raids that had characterized earlier Ottoman military activities, the divestment of Bursa required sustained logistical coordination and the maintenance of siege lines for nearly a decade. Historians believe that Orhan's contribution to this prolonged campaign involved the systematic organization of supply networks that could sustain Ottoman forces during extended periods of static warfare, a capability that would prove crucial for future urban conquests. The eventual capitulation of Bursa in 1326, shortly after Orhan's accession, provided the Ottomans with their first major urban center and established a precedent for the patient, methodical approach to siege warfare that would characterize subsequent campaigns. The administrative significance of Bursa's capture extended far beyond its military implications, as the city provided Orhan with a sophisticated urban infrastructure that could serve as a model for Ottoman governance in other conquered territories. Byzantine records from this period indicate that Orhan chose to preserve many existing administrative structures within Bursa, while gradually introducing Ottoman officials into key positions, a policy of gradual integration that minimized disruption to commercial activities and local governance. The transformation of Bursa into the first Ottoman capital represented a conscious decision to adopt urban administrative practices that differed substantially from the nomadic or semi-nomadic structures that had previously characterized Turkish political organization in Anatolia. The expansion of Ottoman territory under Orhan proceeded along carefully planned axes that reflected both strategic considerations and the practical limitations imposed by Byzantine defensive capabilities. Contemporary sources suggest that Orhan's campaigns during the late 1320s and early 1330s focused primarily on consolidating Ottoman control over the rural territories surrounding Bursa, establishing a secure hinterland that could support the city's population and provide resources for future military operations. This methodical approach to territorial expansion involved the systematic reduction of Byzantine fortifications in the surrounding countryside, a process that required considerable engineering expertise and the coordination of multiple siege trains operating simultaneously across different fronts. The capture of Nicaea in 1331 marked a significant milestone in Ottoman territorial expansion, as this ancient city possessed both symbolic importance as a former imperial capital and practical value as a strategic stronghold controlling important transportation routes. Records indicate that Orhan's siege of Nicaea lasted approximately 1 year, during which Ottoman forces employed increasingly sophisticated siege techniques, including the construction of circumvallation works that effectively isolated the city from external support. The methodical nature of this siege, which involved careful coordination between different Ottoman military units and the maintenance of discipline among besieging forces over an extended period, demonstrated the evolution of Ottoman military capabilities beyond the hit-and-run tactics that had characterized earlier campaigns. The administrative arrangements implemented by Orhan following the conquest of Nicaea reflected his systematic approach to governance and his understanding of the complex ethnic and religious dynamics that characterized Anatolian urban centers. Historical documentation from this period suggests that Orhan established a dual administrative structure that preserved Byzantine civil institutions while introducing Ottoman military and fiscal officials to oversee strategic aspects of urban governance. This careful balance between continuity and innovation enabled the Ottomans to maintain urban economic productivity while gradually integrating conquered populations into the expanding Ottoman political system, a process that required considerable diplomatic skill and administrative flexibility. The expansion of Ottoman naval capabilities during Orhan's reign represented another aspect of his methodical approach to territorial growth, as control over maritime transportation routes became increasingly important for maintaining communication and supply lines between Ottoman territories. Chronicles from this period indicate that Orhan began developing naval facilities around 1333, initially focusing on the construction of small harbors capable of supporting coastal transport vessels rather than attempting to challenge Byzantine naval supremacy directly. This gradual approach to naval development reflected Orhan's preference for incremental expansion of Ottoman capabilities rather than ambitious projects that might overextend available resources or provoke premature confrontation with more powerful adversaries. The siege and eventual capture of Nicomedia in 1337 demonstrated the continued refinement of Ottoman siege techniques and the increasing sophistication of their logistical capabilities. Historical records suggest that this campaign involved coordination between land-based siege forces and naval elements operating in the Gulf of Nicomedia, requiring a level of joint operational planning that exceeded anything attempted during earlier Ottoman campaigns. The methodical reduction of Nicomedia's defenses over a period of several months illustrated Orhan's willingness to invest considerable time and resources in achieving strategic objectives rather than seeking rapid but potentially unstable conquests that might prove difficult to maintain. The administrative integration of Nicomedia into the Ottoman territorial system followed patterns established during the conquest of earlier urban centers, with Orhan again demonstrating his preference for gradual institutional change rather than revolutionary transformation of existing governmental structures. Contemporary Byzantine sources indicate that many local officials remained in their positions following the Ottoman conquest, albeit under the supervision of Ottoman administrators who gradually assumed responsibility for military affairs and tax collection. This measured approach to administrative transition helped maintain economic stability within conquered territories, while providing Ottoman officials with opportunities to learn about local conditions and administrative practices that could be adapted for use elsewhere in the expanding empire. The development of Ottoman military institutions during Orhan's reign reflected his systematic approach to organizational development and his recognition that sustained territorial expansion required military forces capable of conducting diverse types of operations. Records from this period indicate that Orhan began formalizing the recruitment and training procedures for Ottoman infantry forces, moving beyond the relatively informal arrangements that had characterized earlier military organization. The establishment of regular training schedules and standardized equipment requirements represented significant innovations that would provide the foundation for later developments in Ottoman military organization, including the eventual creation of the Janissary Corps under subsequent rulers. The fiscal innovations implemented during Orhan's reign demonstrated his understanding that territorial expansion required sophisticated revenue collection systems capable of supporting both military operations and civil administration across diverse geographic regions. Historical documentation suggests that Orhan began developing standardized tax assessment procedures that could be applied consistently across different types of territories, from urban commercial centers to rural agricultural regions. These administrative innovations required considerable bureaucratic expertise and represented a significant departure from the relatively simple tribute collection systems that had characterized earlier Ottoman fiscal practices. The diplomatic initiatives undertaken by Orhan during the 1340s reflected his recognition that sustained expansion required careful management of relationships with neighboring powers, particularly the declining Byzantine Empire and various Anatolian beyliks that remained independent of Ottoman control. Contemporary sources indicate that Orhan engaged in extensive diplomatic correspondence with Byzantine officials, sometimes negotiating temporary truces that provided opportunities for consolidating recent conquest while preparing for future campaigns. These diplomatic activities demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of regional political dynamics and illustrated Orhan's preference for achieving strategic objectives through patient negotiation when direct military action might prove unnecessarily costly or risky. The establishment of Ottoman administrative presence in conquered territories during Orhan's reign involved the careful cultivation of relationships with local religious and commercial leaders, whose cooperation was essential for maintaining stability and economic productivity. Historical records suggest that Orhan devoted considerable attention to understanding local customs and legal traditions, often incorporating elements of existing legal systems into Ottoman administrative practices, rather than imposing uniform procedures that might provoke resistance or disrupt established social relationships. This methodical approach to cultural integration required considerable diplomatic skill and demonstrated Orhan's recognition that sustainable conquest involved winning the acceptance of conquered populations rather than merely defeating their military forces. This emphasis on gradual integration naturally led to the development of increasingly sophisticated administrative mechanisms that would become hallmarks of Ottoman governance for centuries to come. Under Orhan's reign, which extended from approximately 1326 to 1362, we observe the emergence of what historians term the Dev-Shirme system's earliest precursors, though the fully developed institution would not crystallize until the reign of Murad I. The initial experiments in administrative recruitment focus primarily on identifying capable administrators from among both Muslim Turkish populations and converted Christian elites who demonstrated particular aptitude for bureaucratic work. Records from this period, though fragmentary, suggest that Orhan's court maintained detailed registers of administrative appointments, tax collections, and military obligations that represented a significant advancement over the relatively informal record-keeping practices of earlier Anatolian beyliks. The physical infrastructure of early Ottoman administration centered around the development of permanent administrative centers in newly conquered territories. Bursa, following its capture in 1326, underwent a systematic transformation from a Byzantine commercial hub into the administrative heart of the expanding Ottoman realm. Archaeological evidence indicates that Ottoman administrators established a complex of buildings dedicated specifically to governance functions, including a treasury, records repository, and judicial chambers that operated according to increasingly standardized procedures. The treasury of Bursa, constructed sometime between 1335 and 1340, employed a staff of approximately 12 full-time clerks who maintained meticulous records of revenue collection, military expenditures, and administrative costs using a modified form of Arabic script adapted for Turkish administrative terminology. The development of the Taymar system during this period represents perhaps the most significant administrative innovation of Orhan's reign, establishing the foundational relationship between military service and land tenure that would characterize Ottoman provincial administration for over 3 centuries. Unlike the iqtuita systems employed by contemporary Islamic states, which typically granted temporary land assignments based on personal relationships with ruling elites, the Ottoman timar system created standardized categories of land grants tied to specific military obligations and administrative responsibilities. Historians believe that the first systematic timar grants were issued around 1330, primarily in territories surrounding Bursa and extending gradually into newly conquered regions of northwestern Anatolia. These early timars typically encompass between 3,000 and 20,000 akçe in annual revenue, with grant holders obligated to maintain specified numbers of armed cavalry and to provide administrative services during peacetime. The administrative complexity of managing this emerging timar system necessitated the development of specialized bureaucratic positions that had no direct precedent in earlier Turkish administrative practice. The position of defterdar, or chief financial officer, appears in Ottoman records for the first time during Orhan's reign, specifically in a document dated 1334 that details revenue assessments for territories in the Sakarya River Valley. This official bore responsibility for maintaining comprehensive registers of all timar grants, calculating the military obligations associated with each grant, and coordinating the complex process of reassigning timars when holders died or failed to fulfill their obligations. Supporting the defterdar were numerous specialized clerks, including the mukataçı, who managed tax farming operations, the tahririçi, who conducted detailed population and resource surveys, and the tezkereci, who maintained correspondence between provincial administrators and the central government in Bursa. The judicial administration that emerged during this period demonstrates particularly clearly the Ottoman approach to synthesizing diverse legal traditions into coherent institutional frameworks. Rather than imposing a uniform system of Islamic law throughout their territories, early Ottoman administrators developed what scholars term a layered approach to legal administration that accommodated existing Christian legal practices while gradually expanding the scope of Islamic juridical authority. Court records from Nicaea, conquered by Ottoman forces in 1331, indicate that local Christian populations continued to resolve matters of marriage, inheritance, and commercial disputes through traditional Byzantine legal procedures, while criminal matters and disputes involving Muslims fell under the jurisdiction of newly appointed qadis, who applied Hanafi interpretations of Islamic law. This system required considerable administrative coordination, as legal decisions often involve parties subject to different legal traditions, necessitating the development of complex procedures for determining which legal framework applied to specific cases. The appointment and supervision of qadis throughout Ottoman territories during Orhan's reign followed increasingly standardized procedures that reflected the growing sophistication of central administrative control. Unlike the informal appointment processes common among other Anatolian beyliks, the Ottoman system required prospective qadis to undergo examination by established religious scholars and to demonstrate proficiency in Arabic legal texts, Turkish administrative procedures, and local customary law. Records indicate that Orhan's administration maintained a central registry of qualified legal scholars and rotated qadi appointments approximately every 18 months to prevent the development of local power bases that might challenge central authority. The salaries of these judicial officials were paid directly from the central treasury in Bursa, ensuring their loyalty to Ottoman administrative authority rather than to local power holders. Umurs. The expansion of Ottoman administrative control into European territories following the establishment of a permanent foothold at Gallipoli in 1354 presented unprecedented challenges that necessitated further administrative innovations. The conquest of Adrianople in 1361, near the end of Orhan's reign, required the development of administrative procedures capable of governing Christian populations that vastly outnumbered Muslim settlers, and that possessed well-established traditions of Byzantine administrative practice. Ottoman administrators responded by creating what historians term parallel administrative structures that maintained existing Byzantine tax collection mechanisms while overlaying Ottoman military and judicial authority. The result was an administrative system of remarkable complexity that required extensive record-keeping to track the overlapping obligations and privileges of diverse population groups. The financial administration necessary to support this expanding territorial control underwent systematic development during the 1340s and 1350s as Ottoman territories grew to encompass regions with vastly different economic foundations and revenue-generating capacities. The agricultural territories of northwestern Anatolia provided steady but modest revenues primarily through grain production and livestock taxation, while the commercial centers of Bursa and Nicaea generated more substantial but less predictable revenues through customs duties and artisan taxes. Ottoman financial administrators developed sophisticated techniques for calculating expected revenues from different types of economic activity and for adjusting tax assessments based on seasonal variations and long-term economic trends. The central treasury maintained separate accounts for military expenditures, administrative salaries, public works projects, and religious endowments, with detailed monthly reports submitted to Orhan's personal secretariat. The development of diplomatic administrative procedures during this period reflects the Ottoman recognition that sustained expansion required sophisticated management of relationships with neighboring powers, tributary populations, and potential allies. Orhan's court employed permanent diplomatic staff who maintained regular correspondence with the Byzantine court in Constantinople, the Serbian despots in the Central Balkans, and various Italian maritime republics that sought commercial privileges in Ottoman territories. These diplomatic activities required the development of standardized procedures for negotiating treaties, managing tribute payments, and coordinating military cooperation agreements. The Ottoman Chancellery developed distinctive diplomatic protocols that incorporated elements of both Islamic and Byzantine diplomatic practice, producing documents that were acceptable to Christian negotiating partners while maintaining Islamic legal validity. The administrative innovations implemented during Orhan's reign established institutional foundations that would prove remarkably durable and adaptable to the challenges of governing a rapidly expanding multi-ethnic empire. The systematic approach to record-keeping, the development of specialized bureaucratic positions, and the creation of administrative procedures capable of accommodating diverse legal and cultural traditions all represented significant departures from the relatively informal governance practices of earlier Turkish states in Anatolia. Perhaps most significantly, these administrative developments occurred gradually and organically in response to practical governance challenges rather than being imposed according to abstract theoretical principles, ensuring their practical effectiveness and long-term sustainability. The administrative framework that emerged by 1362 provided the institutional foundation upon which Orhan's successors would build an imperial system capable of governing territories spanning 3 continents and encompassing dozens of distinct ethnic and religious communities. This carefully constructed administrative system would prove indispensable when Orhan's son, Murad I, assumed leadership of the Ottoman state in 1362. Murad, whose name derives from the Arabic word for desired one, inherited not merely a collection of Anatolian territories, but a functioning governmental apparatus capable of supporting sustained military campaigns across increasingly distant frontiers. Historical records from the period indicate that Murad's accession occurred without significant internal discord, suggesting that the succession mechanisms established during Orhan's reign had achieved their intended stabilizing effect. Contemporary Byzantine chroniclers, including John Cantacuzénos, noted with evident concern the seamless transition of power within the Ottoman leadership structure, recognizing that this stability represented a fundamental shift from the fractured political landscape that had characterized earlier Turkish beyliks in Anatolia. The strategic situation that confronted Murad in 1362 differed markedly from the circumstances his predecessors had navigated during their expansion across northwestern Anatolia. While Osman and Orhan had contended primarily with weakening Byzantine frontier fortifications and occasional Serbian or Hungarian expeditionary forces, Murad faced the complex task of establishing permanent Ottoman control over territories where multiple competing powers maintained overlapping claims and substantial military capabilities. The Serbian Empire under Stefan Dušan had fragmented following that ruler's death in 1355, creating a patchwork of autonomous principalities and city-states throughout the Central Balkans. Simultaneously, the Bulgarian Empire had split into distinct northern and southern components, with the Tsardom of Tarnovo controlling territories north of the Balkan Mountains, while the Despotate of Dobruja maintained semi-independent status along the lower Danube River. Historians generally agree that Murad's approach to Balkan conquest reflected lessons absorbed during his father's methodical expansion through Bithynia and the surrounding regions. Rather than attempting rapid territorial acquisition through spectacular military victories, Murad implemented what contemporary sources describe as a systematic strategy of incremental advance combined with careful consolidation of administrative control. This methodology becomes apparent when examining the chronological progression of Ottoman territorial acquisitions during the early years of Murad's reign. Archaeological evidence and surviving administrative documents suggest that Ottoman forces established permanent garrisons in captured settlements within months of their initial occupation, indicating that military conquest and administrative integration proceeded according to coordinated planning rather than opportunistic improvisation. The first major Balkan settlement to fall under permanent Ottoman control appears to have been Adrianople, known to the Ottomans as Edirne, which surrendered sometime between 1362 and 1365, according to varying historical accounts. The conquest of this strategically crucial city, located at the confluence of the Maritsa, Tunja, and Ada rivers, provided the Ottomans with a secure base for further expansion into both the eastern and central regions of the Balkan Peninsula. Contemporary chronicles indicate that Murad recognized Adrianople's exceptional strategic value and personally supervised the establishment of Ottoman governmental institutions within the city. By 1365, records suggest that Adrianople had become the de facto capital of Ottoman European territories, with Murad spending increasing portions of each year residing there, rather than in the traditional Anatolian centers of Ottoman power. The systematic nature of Murad's Balkan expansion becomes particularly evident when examining the sequence of subsequent territorial acquisitions during the 1360s and 1370s. Following the consolidation of Ottoman control over Adrianople and its immediate environs, Ottoman forces methodically reduced the remaining Byzantine strongholds throughout Thrace, including the important fortress cities of Çorlu, Babayeski, and Lüleburgaz. Each conquest followed a similar pattern: initial reconnaissance and diplomatic pressure, followed by siege warfare if necessary, concluding with the rapid establishment of Ottoman administrative structures and the integration of local populations into the expanding imperial system. This methodical approach, while lacking the dramatic appeal of rapid conquest, proved remarkably effective at creating stable territorial control that could withstand subsequent military challenges from neighboring powers. The Ottoman expansion into the Central Balkans during this period benefited considerably from the fragmented political situation that had developed following the collapse of effective Serbian imperial authority. Stefan Dušan's death in 1355 had triggered a complex succession dispute that ultimately resulted in the emergence of several autonomous Serbian principalities, including those controlled by Vukašin Mrnjavčević in Macedonia, Lazar Hrebeljanović in the Morava Valley, and various members of the Balšić family in the western regions near the Adriatic coast. These competing Serbian rulers proved incapable of coordinating effective resistance to Ottoman expansion, frequently prioritizing their mutual conflicts over the growing external threat represented by Murad's systematically advancing forces. Murad appears to have understood and deliberately exploited these divisions among the Serbian nobility throughout the 1370s. Rather than confronting the various Serbian principalities simultaneously, Ottoman forces typically focused their attention on individual rulers, while maintaining diplomatic relations or even temporary alliances with their competitors. This approach culminated in the famous Battle of Maritsa, fought on September 26, 1371, near the village of Chernomen in present-day Bulgaria. Historical accounts indicate that this engagement pitted a combined force of approximately 50,000 Serbian and Bulgarian troops under the joint command of Vukašin Mrnjavčević and his brother Uglješa against a significantly smaller Ottoman army commanded by Lala Shahin Pasha. one of Murad's most capable military commanders. The outcome of the Battle of Maritsa fundamentally altered the strategic balance throughout the central and southern Balkans. Contemporary sources describe the comprehensive defeat of the Christian coalition, with both Vukašin and Uglješa perishing during the fighting along with the majority of their forces. Archaeological excavations conducted during the 20th century have uncovered extensive evidence of the battle, including weapons, armor fragments, and skeletal remains, consistent with contemporary descriptions of the engagement's scale and intensity. The victory at Maritsa eliminated the most serious, coordinated resistance to Ottoman expansion in the region, while simultaneously demonstrating the superior tactical capabilities of Ottoman military forces when confronting traditional European heavy cavalry formations. The aftermath of the Maritsa victory enabled Murad to accelerate the pace of Ottoman territorial acquisition throughout Macedonia and eastern Bulgaria during the remainder of the 1370s. Cities and fortified settlements that had previously maintained their independence through alliances with Serbian or Bulgarian rulers now found themselves diplomatically isolated and militarily vulnerable to Ottoman pressure. Contemporary records indicate that many regional leaders chose to submit voluntarily to Ottoman authority rather than risk the destruction that inevitably accompanied prolonged siege warfare. This pattern of submission proved particularly common among the Bulgarian nobility, who had observed the fate of their Serbian counterparts and recognized the futility of armed resistance against the expanding Ottoman state. The integration of these newly acquired territories required Murad to expand and refine the administrative systems his father had developed for governing the original Ottoman domains in Anatolia. Historical evidence suggests that Murad devoted considerable attention to adapting existing Ottoman governmental structures to accommodate the religious, ethnic, and cultural diversity that characterized the Balkan populations now under his authority. Unlike the predominantly Muslim Turkish populations of Anatolia, the Balkan territories contained substantial Christian communities following various Orthodox traditions, along with smaller Catholic and Jewish populations concentrated in particular urban centers. Successfully governing these diverse communities required administrative innovations that would preserve social stability while facilitating the extraction of resources necessary to support continued military expansion. The solution that emerged during Murad's reign involved the systematic development of what historians term the millet system, although the formal codification of this arrangement would not occur until considerably later in Ottoman history. Under this evolving framework, religious communities maintained considerable autonomy over their internal affairs, including legal disputes, educational institutions, and cultural practices, while accepting Ottoman political authority and fulfilling specified fiscal obligations. Contemporary documents indicate that this approach proved remarkably successful at preventing the religious conflicts that had plagued previous attempts by Muslim rulers to govern predominantly Christian populations. The stability achieved through these administrative innovations provided the internal security necessary for Murad to continue his systematic expansion throughout the remaining independent territories of the Balkan Peninsula. By the early 1380s, Murad's methodical approach to Balkan conquest had reduced most of the remaining independent Christian rulers to tributary status or direct Ottoman control. The Bulgarian Tsardom of Tarnovo, after years of intermittent warfare and diplomatic pressure, finally submitted to Ottoman authority in 1382 following the capture of its capital city by forces under the command of Ali Pasha. Contemporary chronicles describe the final siege of Tarnovo as lasting approximately 3 months, with the city's defenders ultimately surrendering after their walls were breached by Ottoman artillery units employing recently acquired cannons manufactured according to techniques learned from European engineers. The fall of Tarnovo effectively eliminated the last significant independent Bulgarian political entity and completed Ottoman control over the crucial strategic corridor connecting their Anatolian homeland with their expanding European territories. The systematic nature of Ottoman expansion under Murad becomes particularly apparent when examining the careful attention devoted to securing lines of communication and supply throughout the newly conquered territories. Rather than simply garrisoning major urban centers, Ottoman forces established networks of smaller fortified positions along critical roadways and river crossings, ensuring that military units and administrative personnel could move safely between distant portions of the empire. Archaeological surveys conducted throughout the Balkans have identified numerous examples of these secondary fortifications, many of which incorporate distinctive Ottoman architectural features while adapting to local topographical constraints. These infrastructural investments, while requiring substantial initial expenditures of resources and manpower, provided the foundation for the long-term stability that would characterize Ottoman rule throughout the region for the subsequent 5 centuries. The culmination of Murad's systematic Balkan expansion occurred with the famous Battle of Kosovo, fought on June 15, 1389, between Ottoman forces and a coalition of Serbian, Bosnian, and Albanian troops commanded by Prince Lazar Hrebeljanović. Historical accounts of this engagement vary considerably in their specific details, reflecting the mythological significance the battle would subsequently acquire in Serbian national consciousness. However, contemporary sources generally agree that the battle resulted in a decisive Ottoman victory that eliminated the last coordinated Christian resistance to Ottoman expansion in the Central Balkans, despite the death of Murad himself during or immediately following the fighting. The consolidation of Ottoman military power following Kosovo necessitated significant institutional reforms, particularly in the organization and training of the empire's military forces. The death of Murad I, while strategically insignificant given the decisive nature of the victory, highlighted the vulnerabilities inherent in traditional military structures that relied heavily on seasonal campaigns and the loyalty of semi-autonomous warrior groups. It was during this period of administrative reorganization under Bayezid I, who assumed the throne immediately following his father's death in 1389, that the foundations were laid for what would become the most distinctive military institution of the Ottoman Empire, the Janissary Corps. The origins of the Janissary system can be traced to the early decades of the 14th century, though historians debate the precise timing of its formal establishment. Contemporary Ottoman chronicles suggest that the basic framework emerged during the reign of Orhan Gazi, approximately between 1326 and 1359, as a response to the limitations of the traditional Ghazi warrior bands that had formed the backbone of early Ottoman military campaigns. These irregular forces, while effective in the context of frontier warfare against Byzantine territories, proved inadequate for the complex siege warfare and sustained military operations required for the conquest of major fortified cities. The fundamental innovation of the Janissary system lay in its recruitment methodology, known as the devshirme, or child levy. This practice, which appears to have been systematized during the late 14th century, involved the periodic collection of Christian boys from the empire's Balkan territories. Records from the period indicate that these levies typically occurred every 3 to 5 years, with Ottoman officials selecting boys between the ages of 8 and 18 from villages throughout present-day Serbia, Bulgaria, Albania, Bosnia, and Greece. The selection process was reportedly quite rigorous, with preference given to boys who demonstrated physical strength, intelligence, and good character, while excluding those from urban areas or families with existing connections to Ottoman administrative structures. Upon selection, these recruits were transported to various training centers throughout the empire, with the primary institutions located in Adrianople, which served as the Ottoman capital during much of the 14th century, and later in Constantinople following its conquest in 1453. The training regimen was comprehensive and extended over a period of several years. Historical accounts describe a systematic process of cultural and religious conversion, during which the recruits were instructed in Islamic theology, Ottoman Turkish language, and the complex hierarchical structures that governed Ottoman society. Simultaneously, they received intensive military training that encompassed not only traditional weapons handling and combat techniques, but also more specialized skills such as siege engineering, artillery operation, and battlefield tactics. The educational component of Janissary training distinguished these forces from virtually all contemporary military organizations in Europe and the Middle East. Unlike the feudal levies or mercenary companies that dominated European warfare during this period, Janissary recruits received systematic instruction in mathematics, which proved essential for artillery calculations and siege engineering. They were also trained in basic administrative skills, as many would later serve in civilian capacities within the Ottoman bureaucracy. This educational emphasis reflected the broader Ottoman approach to governance, which valued meritocracy and administrative competence alongside military prowess. The institutional structure that emerged from this training system was remarkably sophisticated for its time. By the early 15th century, the Janissary Corps had developed into a highly organized military force divided into numerous specialized units, each with distinct functions and responsibilities. The primary combat units, known as Cemaat Ortas, formed the core of the corps and were further subdivided into companies of approximately 100 men each. These units were supplemented by specialist formations, including the Solak, who served as palace guards and ceremonial troops, and various support units responsible for logistics, engineering, and communications. The command structure of the Janissary Corps reflected the meritocratic principles that governed Ottoman administration more broadly. Advancement within the corps was theoretically based on demonstrated competence and loyalty rather than birth or social connections. The highest-ranking officer, known as the R of the Janissaries, reported directly to the Sultan and held considerable influence within the Ottoman government. Below the RR, a complex hierarchy of officers oversaw the various units and specialized functions of the corps. Contemporary records indicate that many of these officers had risen through the ranks from humble origins, having begun their careers as Dev-Shirmo recruits themselves. The military effectiveness of the Janissary Corps became evident during the campaigns of the early 15th century. Unlike the seasonal warriors who had characterized earlier Ottoman military efforts, the Janissaries constituted a standing professional army that could be deployed year-round and maintained in the field for extended periods. This capability proved decisive in the conduct of siege warfare, which required sustained effort and specialized technical knowledge. The siege of Constantinople between 1452 and 1453 demonstrated the full potential of Janissary organization, as these troops operated the massive bronze cannons cast by the Hungarian engineer Orban, while simultaneously conducting conventional assault operations against the city's formidable walls. The logistical systems that supported the Janissary Corps were equally sophisticated and represented a significant innovation in military organization. The Corps maintained its own supply networks, including specialized units responsible for procurement, transportation, and distribution of food, weapons, and other necessities. These logistical capabilities were supported by an extensive network of workshops and manufacturing facilities located throughout the empire. Records from the 16th century indicate that the Ottoman government maintained armories in Constantinople, Adrianople, Bursa, and numerous other cities, all of which contributed to the equipment and supply of Janissary units. The financial support for the Janissary Corps derived from multiple sources within the Ottoman fiscal system. Each Janissary received a regular salary, paid quarterly, which distinguished them from the feudal troops who served in exchange for land grants, or the irregular forces who depended primarily on booty and plunder for compensation. The regularity and reliability of these payments contributed significantly to the Corps' effectiveness and loyalty. Additionally, Janissaries received various privileges and exemptions that enhanced their social status within Ottoman society. They were exempt from most taxes, enjoyed preferential treatment in legal proceedings, and had access to retirement benefits that were unavailable to other segments of the population. The social organization of the Janissary Corps incorporated elements that reflected both military necessity and Islamic religious principles. The Corps was organized around a system of barracks life that emphasized collective identity and mutual dependence. Janissaries lived in communal facilities, shared meals, prepared in common kitchens, and participated in regular religious observances that reinforced their bonds to each other and to the Ottoman state. This communal organization extended beyond mere practical considerations to encompass a complex system of traditions, ceremonies, and symbolic practices that distinguished the Janissaries from other military and civilian groups within the empire. The relationship between the Janissary Corps and the broader Ottoman administrative system evolved considerably during the 15th and early 16th centuries. Initially conceived primarily as a military force, the Corps gradually assumed various civilian functions that reflected the Ottoman preference for administrative efficiency and institutional flexibility. Many Janissaries served in provincial governments, customs houses, and other civilian agencies, particularly in territories where their military training and loyalty to the central government made them valuable representatives of Ottoman authority. The expansion of Janissary responsibilities coincided with the territorial growth of the Ottoman Empire during the 15th and 16th centuries. As Ottoman forces conquered new territories in the Balkans, Anatolia, and eventually the Arab lands, Janissary units were frequently assigned to garrison duties in strategic locations. These assignments required not only military competence, but also administrative skills and cultural sensitivity, as Janissaries often served as intermediaries between local populations and Ottoman authorities. Historical records suggest that many Janissaries became effectively bilingual or multilingual, facilitating communication and administration in the empire's diverse territories. The technological adaptations that characterized Janissary development during this period reflected broader changes in military science and engineering. The Corps was among the first military organizations to systematically incorporate gunpowder weapons into its standard equipment and tactics. By the late 15th century, Janissary units routinely employed matchlock muskets, small cannons, and various types of explosive devices. This technological sophistication required extensive training and ongoing maintenance, leading to the development of specialized technical units within the Corps responsible for weapons maintenance, ammunition production, and tactical innovation. The recruitment practices that sustained the Janissary Corps remained relatively stable throughout the 15th and early 16th centuries, though administrative records indicate various modifications and refinements in the Dev-Shirmi system. The geographic scope of recruitment gradually expanded as Ottoman territories grew, eventually encompassing regions of Hungary, Moldavia, and other areas beyond the original Balkan recruitment zones. Simultaneously, the selection criteria became more sophisticated, with Ottoman officials developing detailed guidelines for identifying suitable candidates and more systematic procedures for their initial evaluation and assignment. These administrative refinements in the Dev-Shirm system proved particularly advantageous during the reign of Bayezid I, who ascended to the Ottoman throne in 1389, following the death of his father Murad I at the Battle of Kosovo. Bayezid, who would later earn the epithet Yildirim, meaning thunderbolt, due to the remarkable speed of his military campaigns, inherited an empire that was already well positioned for expansion, but still required the human resources that the Dev-Shirme system could provide. Historical records from this period indicate that Bayezid immediately recognized the value of maintaining and expanding the Janissary Corps, particularly as he began contemplating military operations on an unprecedented scale. The new sultan's approach to territorial acquisition differed markedly from his predecessors in both scope and velocity, necessitating a military apparatus that could sustain multiple simultaneous campaigns across vast geographic distances. The early years of Bayezid's reign, specifically from 1389 to 1394, witnessed what historians commonly describe as the most rapid territorial expansion in early Ottoman history. Unlike the methodical incremental advances that had characterized the reigns of Osman I, Orhan, and even Murad I, Bayezid's military strategy emphasized swift, decisive actions that could secure large territorial gains within relatively short timeframes. This approach required not only the traditional Ottoman military units, but also the increasingly sophisticated Janissary formations that had been refined through the Devshirme recruitment processes. Contemporary Byzantine chronicles from this period, particularly those maintained in Constantinople, record a sense of alarm at the speed with which Ottoman forces could appear at widely separated locations, often within weeks of each other. The acceleration of Ottoman territorial growth during Bayezid's reign can be attributed to several interconnected factors, chief among them being the Sultan's ability to coordinate multiple military campaigns simultaneously. In 1390, for instance, while Ottoman forces were engaged in consolidating control over newly acquired territories in western Anatolia, Bayezid simultaneously directed operations in the Balkans, specifically targeting the remaining independent Serbian principalities and Bulgarian strongholds that had managed to maintain autonomy following earlier Ottoman incursions. This dual-front strategy, historians note, would have been virtually impossible without the disciplined, well-trained Janissary units that could be deployed rapidly and maintain their effectiveness across extended campaign seasons. The geographic scope of Bayezid's territorial acquisitions during the 1390s encompassed regions that stretched from the eastern shores of the Aegean Sea to the approaches of the Hungarian frontier. In Anatolia, Ottoman forces under Bayezid's direct command systematically absorbed the remaining Turkmen beyliks, including the Sarukhanid beylik centered around Manisa, which fell to Ottoman control in 1390, and the Aydinid beylik, whose principal city of Aydin was incorporated into the Ottoman administrative system by 1391. These Anatolian campaigns, while perhaps less dramatic than the concurrent Balkan operations, proved essential for consolidating Ottoman control over the western regions of Asia Minor and eliminating potential centers of resistance that might have complicated future military endeavors. Simultaneously, Bayezid's Balkan campaigns during this period achieved remarkable territorial gains through a combination of military conquest and diplomatic maneuvering. The remaining independent Serbian territories, including those controlled by Stefan Lazarevic, were gradually brought under Ottoman suzerainty through a process that combined military pressure with strategic alliances. By 1392, historians indicate that Serbian forces were actively participating in Ottoman military campaigns as auxiliary units, a development that significantly enhanced Bayezid's ability to project military power deeper into Central Europe. This arrangement proved mutually beneficial, as it provided the Serbs with a degree of internal autonomy, while supplying the Ottomans with experienced local military units familiar with the terrain and defensive capabilities of neighboring regions. The administrative challenges posed by such rapid territorial expansion required corresponding developments in Ottoman governmental structures, particularly in the areas of provincial administration and revenue collection. Bayezid's territorial acquisitions necessitated the establishment of new administrative units, known as sanjaks, each governed by appointed officials responsible for maintaining order, collecting taxes, and providing military levies when required for imperial campaigns. Records from the Ottoman archives suggest that during the 1390s, the number of sanjaks within the empire increased from approximately 22 to nearly 40, reflecting not only the geographic expansion, but also the increasingly sophisticated approach to territorial administration that Bayezid's government adopted. The revenue implications of this territorial expansion proved substantial, providing the Ottoman treasury with increased resources that could fund additional military campaigns and administrative developments. Contemporary estimates suggest that the annual revenue of the Ottoman Empire approximately doubled during the first decade of Bayezid's reign, largely due to the incorporation of previously independent territories with established agricultural and commercial foundations. The former Byzantine territories in northwestern Anatolia, for instance, contributed significant agricultural revenues, while the expanded Balkan territories provided both agricultural products and important commercial revenues from the trade routes that passed through the region. These increased revenues enabled Bayezid to maintain larger standing military forces and to sustain longer campaign seasons than his predecessors had typically managed. The military innovations that accompanied Bayezid's territorial expansion included not only the continued refinement of Janissary training and deployment, but also the increased utilization of siege warfare techniques and equipment. The rapid conquest of fortified positions that characterize many of Bayezid's campaigns required sophisticated understanding of siegecraft, including the deployment of early artillery pieces and the coordination of extended siege operations with concurrent field campaigns in other regions. Historical accounts from this period indicate that Ottoman forces under Bayezid's command successfully conducted simultaneous siege operations at multiple locations, a capability that required extensive logistical planning and the maintenance of specialized military units trained in siege warfare techniques. The diplomatic dimensions of Bayezid's territorial expansion strategy involved complex relationships with various European powers, particularly Hungary, Wallachia, and the remnants of the Byzantine Empire. Contemporary diplomatic correspondence preserved in various European archives reveals that Bayezid maintained an extensive network of diplomatic contacts, often using the threat of military action to secure favorable territorial agreements without the expense and uncertainty of prolonged military campaigns. The Ottoman diplomatic approach during this period combined traditional Islamic concepts of temporary truces, known as hudna, with more pragmatic considerations related to military logistics and the seasonal nature of medieval campaign warfare. The relationship between Bayezid's government and the Byzantine Empire during this period exemplifies the complex diplomatic maneuvering that accompanied Ottoman territorial expansion. Rather than immediately moving to eliminate the remaining Byzantine territories around Constantinople, Bayezid adopted a strategy of gradual encirclement and economic pressure, securing control over the approaches to the Byzantine capital while maintaining formal diplomatic relations with the imperial court. This approach allowed Ottoman forces to consolidate control over the newly acquired territories in northwestern Anatolia and eastern Thrace without becoming entangled in a potentially lengthy and expensive siege of Constantinople itself. By 1394, the territorial extent of the Ottoman Empire under Bayezid I had grown to encompass most of northwestern and west-central Anatolia, the majority of the Balkan Peninsula south of the Danube River, and significant portions of what would later become modern Bulgaria and Serbia. This territorial expansion represented not merely geographic growth, but also the incorporation of diverse populations with varying religious, linguistic, and cultural backgrounds, creating administrative challenges that would influence Ottoman governmental development for subsequent generations. The speed of this expansion, achieved within approximately 5 years, established patterns of rapid territorial acquisition that would characterize Ottoman expansion during the empire's classical period. The military capabilities that enabled such rapid territorial expansion reflected the maturation of Ottoman military institutions, particularly the Janissary Corps, which had evolved from a relatively small elite unit into a substantial military force capable of independent operations across multiple theaters simultaneously. Contemporary estimates suggest that by the mid-1390s, the Janissary Corps comprised approximately 8,000 trained soldiers, organized into multiple regiments with specialized functions, including infantry assault, siege operations, and palace guard duties. This expansion of the Janissary Corps was directly supported by the continued operation and refinement of a Devshirme recruitment system, which provided a steady supply of candidates for military and administrative positions within the expanding empire. The systematic recruitment and training of Janissaries through the Devshirme system would prove particularly crucial during the tumultuous period that followed Sultan Bayezid I's capture and death at the Battle of Ankara in 1402. This defeat at the hands of Timur, also known as Tamerlane, precipitated what historians commonly refer to as the Ottoman Interregnum, a period of civil war and succession disputes that lasted from 1402 to 1413. The Janissary Corps, despite its loyalty to the Ottoman dynasty, found itself divided among competing claimants to the throne, each of whom sought to secure the support of these elite military units to legitimize their claims to power. Following Bayezid I's death in Timurid captivity, likely in early 1403, 4 of his sons emerged as principal contenders for the Ottoman throne. These were Suleiman Çelebi, who controlled much of the European territories from his base in Edirne, Mehmet Çelebi, who established his authority over the Anatolian heartland around Amasya, Isa Çelebi, who initially held sway over parts of western Anatolia from Balıkesir, and Musa Çelebi, who would later emerge as a significant player in the European territories. Historical records indicate that each brother attempted to maintain the administrative and military structures established by their father, including the continued operation of the Janissary Corps and the Devshirme recruitment system. though on a necessarily reduced scale due to the fragmentation of the empire. The division of the Ottoman state during the interregnum necessitated complex negotiations and shifting alliances with neighboring powers, particularly the Byzantine Empire and various Balkan principalities. Emperor Manuel II Palaiologos of Byzantium, recognizing the opportunity presented by Ottoman disunity, engaged in diplomatic relations with multiple Ottoman claimants simultaneously. Contemporary Byzantine chronicles suggest that Manuel II provided financial and military support to Suleiman Çelebi in exchange for territorial concessions, including the return of Thessalonica and various Aegean islands to Byzantine control. These agreements, formalized in treaties signed between 1403 and 1404, temporarily reversed many of the territorial gains achieved during the preceding decades of Ottoman expansion. The Serbian despot Stefan Lazarević, who had served as a vassal of Bayezid I and had even fought alongside Ottoman forces at Ankara, found himself in a particularly complex position during the interregnum. Historical sources indicate that Stefan initially supported Suleiman Çelebi's claim to the throne, providing military assistance in the form of approximately 2,000 Serbian cavalry. This support was formalized through a treaty signed in Edirne in 1404, which granted Stefan considerable autonomy over Serbian territories while maintaining nominal Ottoman suzerainty. However, as the succession struggle evolved, Stefan would later transfer his allegiance to Mehmed Çelebi, demonstrating the fluid nature of political alliances during this period of Ottoman weakness. The administrative challenges faced by each Ottoman claimant during the interregnum were considerable, as the fragmentation of the empire disrupted established systems of taxation, recruitment, and governance. Mehmed Çelebi, operating from his base in Amasya, worked systematically to rebuild the Anatolian administrative structure, reappointing key officials who had served under Bayezid I and attempting to restore the regular collection of taxes from agricultural regions. Documents from this period indicate that Mehmed maintained correspondence with various Anatolian beyliks, seeking to prevent their complete independence while acknowledging the temporary reduction in Ottoman power. The Beylik of Karaman, in particular, took advantage of Ottoman weakness to reclaim territories in central Anatolia that had been conquered by Bayezid I in the 1390s. Suleiman Çelebi's administration in the European territories faced similar challenges, though his position was complicated by his extensive concessions to Christian powers and the resulting dissatisfaction among traditional Ottoman supporters. The Janissary units stationed in European fortresses remained largely loyal to Suleiman's authority, but their effectiveness was diminished by irregular pay and supply problems, resulting from the reduced territorial base and disrupted tax collection. Contemporary accounts suggest that by 1407, many Janissary units had not received regular payment for months, leading to occasional acts of insubordination and desertion to other claimants who could offer more reliable compensation. The emergence of Musa Çelebi as a significant contender around 1409 marked a crucial turning point in the interregnum period. Historical sources indicate that Musa had initially been absent from the succession struggle, possibly due to his youth or his position as a governor in a remote province. However, his entry into the conflict brought a new dynamic as he positioned himself as the champion of traditional Ottoman policies, criticizing his brother Suleiman's concessions to Christian powers and promising to restore the empire's former strength. Musa's forces, which included both Janissary units that had defected from Suleiman and irregular troops recruited from Anatolian Turkish tribes, crossed into Europe sometime in late 1409 or early 1410. The military campaigns that characterized the final phase of the interregnum demonstrated both the resilience of Ottoman military traditions and the adaptability of the administrative system established under earlier rulers. Musa's victories over Suleiman's forces near Edirne in 1410 and his subsequent capture of key European strongholds illustrated the continued effectiveness of Ottoman military organization, even during a period of political fragmentation. Archaeological evidence from excavations at several Thracian fortresses suggests that these installations were maintained and even strengthened during the interregnum, indicating that military priorities remained paramount despite the succession disputes. The diplomatic maneuvering between the Ottoman claimants and external powers during this period reveals the sophisticated understanding of international relations that had developed within Ottoman administrative circles. Mehmed Çelebi's negotiations with Wallachian Prince Mircea the Elder, documented in correspondence preserved in Romanian archives, demonstrate a nuanced approach to maintaining Ottoman influence in the Danubian regions, while acknowledging the temporary reduction in direct military power. These negotiations, conducted primarily between 1408 and 1411, resulted in agreements that preserved Ottoman suzerainty over key Danubian crossing points while granting Wallachia increased autonomy in internal affairs. The resolution of the interregnum through Mehmed Çelebi's victory at the Battle of Çamurlu in July 1413 marked the beginning of a systematic effort to reconstruct and consolidate the Ottoman state. Mehmed I, as he became known following his decisive victory over Musa Çelebi, immediately initiated policies designed to restore the administrative and military institutions that had been disrupted during the succession struggle. The reunification of the Janissary Corps under central command was among his first priorities, with records indicating that approximately 6,000 Janissaries from various factions were reorganized into a unified force by the end of 1413. The process of dynastic consolidation that followed Mehmed I's victory required careful attention to the competing claims and loyalties that had emerged during the interregnum. The new sultan's approach to former supporters of his deceased brothers demonstrated considerable political sophistication, combining selective punishment of key opponents with generous pardons for those willing to demonstrate loyalty to the reunified state. Administrative records from the early years of Mehmed I's reign show systematic efforts to restore the tax collection systems, rebuild military fortifications, and re-establish diplomatic relations with neighboring powers on terms more favorable to Ottoman interests. The reconstruction of the Devshirme recruitment system under Mehmed I reflected both continuity with pre-interregnum practices and adaptations based on experiences during the succession struggle. Historical sources indicate that the first major Devshirme levy, following reunification, occurred in 1414, targeting Christian communities in the Balkans that had remained under consistent Ottoman control throughout the interregnum. This recruitment drive, which historians estimate collected approximately 1,500 boys for training in various capacities, served both military needs and symbolic purposes, demonstrating the restoration of Ottoman administrative authority over subject populations. The territorial consolidation achieved during the early years of Mehmed I's reign involved systematic campaigns to recover lands that had been lost during the interregnum or had asserted independence during the period of Ottoman weakness. The reconquest of territories held by the Beylik of Karaman required careful coordination between regular Ottoman forces and local administrators who had maintained loyalty to the central government throughout the succession struggle. Military records suggest that these campaigns, conducted primarily between 1414 and 1416, were characterized by the methodical siege of fortified positions rather than large-scale field battles, reflecting the cautious approach necessitated by the still rebuilding state of Ottoman military resources. The Janissary Corps that emerged from this period of reconstruction was not simply a restoration of the military institution that had existed under Bayezid I, but rather an evolved organization that incorporated new training methods, revised command structures, and enhanced integration with other components of the Ottoman military system. Similarly, the administrative reforms implemented during the Restoration period established precedents and institutional practices that would influence Ottoman governance throughout subsequent centuries. The careful documentation of territorial surveys, the systematic approach to agricultural recovery, and the methodical re-establishment of commercial regulations created administrative traditions that emphasized thorough record-keeping, gradual implementation of policy changes, and careful attention to the economic foundations of political authority. These characteristics would become defining features of Ottoman administrative practice during the empire's later periods of expansion and territorial consolidation. The diplomatic approaches developed during Mehmed I's reign also established patterns that would influence Ottoman foreign policy in subsequent decades. The emphasis on negotiated settlements, the careful balance between territorial ambitions and available resources, and the recognition of the interconnected nature of political and economic relationships with neighboring powers became characteristic elements of Ottoman diplomatic strategy. While later sultans would pursue more aggressive expansion policies, the institutional framework and strategic principles established during the Restoration period provided the foundation for these subsequent achievements. By the final years of his reign, Mehmed I had succeeded in establishing a level of political stability and administrative effectiveness that provided clear evidence of the Ottoman dynasty's recovery from the crisis of the interregnum. The territorial extent of the restored Ottoman state, while smaller than the empire that had existed under Bayezid I prior to the Battle of Ankara, was characterized by more effective governance, more reliable military institutions, and more sustainable economic relationships than had been achieved during the earlier period of rapid expansion. Contemporary observers, including both Ottoman chroniclers and foreign diplomats, noted that the methodical approach to restoration had created a political foundation that appeared capable of supporting renewed expansion while avoiding the vulnerabilities that had contributed to the earlier collapse of Ottoman power. The successful completion of this restoration process established the political and institutional framework that would enable Mehmed's successors to resume the territorial expansion and cultural development that would ultimately transform the Ottoman state into one of the world's most significant empires. This institutional foundation would prove essential during the reign of Murad II, who ascended to the Ottoman throne in 1421 at approximately 18 years of age. Murad's accession marked the beginning of a crucial period in Ottoman development, one characterized not by dramatic territorial conquest, but by the methodical refinement and systematization of the administrative mechanisms that would govern the expanding empire. Historical records indicate that Murad II inherited a state that had successfully weathered the interregnum crisis, but still required careful institutional development to achieve the stability necessary for sustained growth. The early years of Murad's reign were marked by challenges that would ultimately demonstrate the resilience of the restored Ottoman system. Byzantine sources from this period record attempts by the aging Byzantine Empire to exploit what they perceived as Ottoman weakness during the transition of power. Emperor John VIII Palaiologos, seeking to capitalize on the perceived vulnerabilities of the young Ottoman ruler, initiated diplomatic contacts with various European powers in an effort to organize resistance against Ottoman expansion. However, these efforts revealed the extent to which the Ottoman restoration had strengthened the empire's institutional foundations, as Murad's administration proved capable of responding effectively to these external pressures, while simultaneously pursuing internal reforms. Thank you for studying with the Sleep Scholar. May your dreams be filled with quiet knowledge. Sleep well, and we'll see you in the next lesson.